When I was in middle school, our science class took a field trip to the salt marsh in our town. It was supposed to be educational, something about observing marine life and writing down what we saw through binoculars. I barely remember the actual lesson. What stuck with me was everything that went wrong. We were assigned partners and paired off in teams of 2. I ended up with my best friend, Jordan. The instructions were simple. Walk along the wooden pathways built over the marsh and take notes on certain birds and animals we could spot from a distance. It sounded simple enough, but to us it was painfully dull. Jordan and I started falling behind the rest of the class on purpose. We kept glancing back at Ms. Stern and the 2 other teachers who were supervising the trip. Once they were far enough ahead and distracted with the other students, we quietly turned around and headed down a different walkway. The entire marsh was crisscrossed with narrow wooden paths that twisted and turned over the swampy water. It felt like a giant maze suspended above mud and tall grass. We came across a large sign that clearly said something along the lines of "Do not enter unless you are authorized personnel." Naturally, that made it even more tempting. So we ignored it and kept going. Tall marsh grass towered over us on both sides of the path, thick enough to keep us hidden from anyone who might glance our way. After walking for a while, we passed a small building about the size of a shed. There was a sign on the door that read, "Do not enter." Jordan tried the handle anyway, but it was locked. We shrugged and continued deeper into the maze. The farther we went, the more enormous the place seemed. Every turn looked like the last one. The fun of sneaking off started to wear off, and eventually we agreed it was time to head back. It was getting later, and we had been gone long enough that someone might notice. We turned around and tried retracing our steps. At least, we thought we were retracing them. After several turns that did not look familiar, we stopped and looked at each other. We were lost, completely lost. The sun was beginning to sink lower in the sky, and any sense of direction we thought we had was gone. At first, we were just uneasy. Then as more time passed and every path looked identical, worry turned into real fear. We tried to find the little shed again, hoping it would guide us back the right way, but we never saw it. The marsh grass was taller than both of us and blocked almost everything from view. By the time the sun was nearly gone, we knew the class had already left. This was before cell phones were common, especially for middle school kids. We had no way to call anyone. We resisted yelling for help at first, embarrassed and hoping we would figure it out. But as darkness settled in, panic fully set in. That was when we heard it. A splashing sound in the water nearby. Not random movement. It sounded like someone wading through the shallow marsh, step by step. We froze. Then we started walking faster along the wooden path. When we stopped again to listen, the splashing was still there. Closer. We did not have flashlights. The only light came from the rising moon. The tall grass around us seemed alive, shifting and whispering. It felt like we were being watched. Jordan suddenly seemed to snap. He muttered something under his breath and marched toward the grass where the noise was coming from. He shoved the thick blades aside and let out a scream I had never heard from him before. I did not see what he saw, and honestly, I did not want to. The look on his face was enough. I turned and ran, and he ran right behind me. We sprinted down the path, our footsteps pounding on the wood, stopping only when we were too out of breath to continue. Between gasps, he told me he had seen a person crouched in the grass. Someone hiding there. We kept running, then stopping, and running again. After what felt like forever, we heard something else. The distant thrum of a helicopter. The sound grew louder, and soon we saw it overhead with a bright searchlight scanning the marsh. We waved our arms wildly, jumping up and down. I have no idea if that helped, or if they had already spotted us. Eventually, the beam locked onto us and stayed there. We thought the helicopter might come down and rescue us, because we were clueless kids. Instead it hovered, keeping the spotlight fixed on our location. A bit later, police officers reached us on foot. The helicopter had guided them straight to where we were. Our parents had reported us missing after we never came home from the trip. The officers led us carefully back through the maze to safety. We told them about the person in the marsh, the one we believed had been following us. As for Ms. Stern, apparently she either miscounted students before leaving or did not count at all. The bus had driven back to school without us. I still cannot believe she did not lose her job over it. To this day, that night remains the most terrifying experience of my life. I was just a kid, and for those long hours in the dark marsh, it felt like the world had completely forgotten us. During my senior year of high school, our U.S. history class took an end-of-year trip to Boston. One of our main assignments was to walk the Freedom Trail and visit important landmarks like the Bunker Hill Monument. There were teachers and volunteer chaperones with us, but my two friends Sean and Matt and I were all 18 at the time. We convinced one of the more relaxed teachers to let us split off on our own for a while. Once we got the green light, we headed off into the city to explore without the rest of the group. We wandered around Boston Harbor first and grabbed food at a waterfront restaurant. After that, we checked out Quincy Market, looked at a few other historical spots, and eventually ended up at a small cemetery called the Granary Burying Ground. That is where things started to feel wrong. There were a handful of other visitors walking through the cemetery besides us. We were not deeply interested in it. We were mostly passing through because it was one of the main places we were expected to see. While we were walking between the old gravestones, one man caught my attention. He was dressed in an old-fashioned trench coat and wore a small top hat. It was a warm day, definitely too warm for a heavy coat like that. He had a gray mustache, and that is about all I can clearly remember about his features. What stood out was the way he was standing completely still and staring directly at me. He was not reading headstones or moving like the other visitors. He was just watching. I quietly muttered to Sean and Matt, asking why that guy was staring at me, and I subtly guided them toward the exit of the cemetery. Once we stepped back out onto the street, I said more clearly that some strange old man had been watching me. Neither of them really noticed him, and I did not want to go back in just to point him out, so we kept walking. We were supposed to meet the rest of the class at Quincy Market around 5, so we started heading in that direction. A few minutes into the walk, I randomly glanced over my shoulder. He was there again. The same man with the top hat, not too far behind us in the crowd. I could see him clearly between people passing by. He wore that same neutral, almost stern expression, his gray mustache covering much of his mouth. And once again, it felt like his eyes were locked on me. He was not even walking. I turned forward again and tried to shake it off. I told myself that if I saw him one more time, then something was truly strange. When we reached Quincy Market and were about to reconnect with our group, I saw him again. He was standing near a street corner in the distance, facing directly toward me. He blended into the crowd, except for that distinct top hat. I rushed over to Sean and Matt and grabbed their shoulders so they would turn around. I pointed toward the corner where the man had been standing less than 10 seconds earlier. He was gone. I told them that the creepy old man from the cemetery seemed to be following us, or at least following me. I had no explanation for how he could disappear so quickly in such an open area. It made no sense. That night at the hotel, I had a nightmare. In the dream, I was back in my bedroom at home, hiding under my bed. I could see a pair of feet slowly approaching. They stopped at the end of the bed. Then the man in the top hat bent down and looked under the bed at me, wearing the same blank expression. I jolted awake moments later to a loud thud somewhere in the hotel room. I had no idea what caused it. I immediately woke up, Sean, Matt, and the other guy staying in our room, and asked if they heard it. None of them had heard anything. To this day, I still do not know what that sound was. Years later, around Christmas, I was flipping through old photo albums with my grandparents. I stopped at one picture that made my stomach drop. There was a man in the photo who looked incredibly familiar. He was wearing a top hat that looked almost identical to the one I had seen in Boston. He had the same gray mustache and the same neutral expression. I asked my grandparents who the man was. They told me it was my grandmother's father. I am not claiming that I saw my grandmother's deceased father wandering around Boston that day, but the resemblance was so striking that it shook me. Maybe my mind connected the dots years later and filled in the blanks. Maybe it was all coincidence. Still, that entire chain of events unsettles me whenever I think about it. Even now, it gives me chills. This happened in November of 2013. I was a freshman in high school, in 9th grade, and I went on a trip with my Boy Scout troop to Alcatraz Island. For anyone unfamiliar with it, Alcatraz is the well-known former prison located in the middle of San Francisco Bay. Our troop had the rare chance to actually spend the night on the island and sleep inside the old prison cells. A few of my friends and I signed up immediately because it felt like a once-in-a-lifetime chance. We arrived by ferry sometime around 2 in the afternoon. As we stepped onto the island, our guide began sharing the history of the prison. He talked about the inmates who had once tried to escape by swimming away into the bay. A few men had managed to get off the island, but they were never found again. Most people believe they drowned, which makes sense considering how far the swim is. On top of that, San Francisco is famously windy, and the water in the bay is freezing cold, so hypothermia would have been almost unavoidable. While the tour continued, my friends and I joked around about how the place had to be haunted. To make things more intense, the guide announced that he would take us to the execution area in the hospital at midnight. My friends Ash and Steve and I kept trying to scare each other every chance we got. At one point, I hid in a dark corner and jumped out at Steve as he walked by. We were laughing and messing around, but there was still something unsettling about being there after dark. Eventually, midnight came, and we were led to the execution room. The moment we stepped inside, Ash and I both noticed a terrible smell. It was strong and unpleasant, almost like decay. What made it stranger was that no one else seemed to notice it. The guide had already mentioned that the execution room had not been used in over 100 years. Alcatraz itself had been closed since the 1960s. After executions, bodies were removed, so there was no reason for any odor to linger. Sure, there were old stains that were said to be blood, but they were over a century old. Ash whispered to me that it was strange no one else could smell what we were smelling. I tried to laugh it off and joked that maybe some spirit was trying to mess with us. After that, we moved on to the hospital area. While we were standing there, I could have sworn I heard faint whispering. Ash and I looked at each other at the exact same time, both clearly hearing it, and the lights flickered above us. The guide calmly said the lights always flickered and began explaining how inmates who were mentally unstable were often treated in that hospital. He even mentioned one particular prisoner who used to whisper constantly when he spoke. The timing of his story with what we had just heard made my skin crawl. Later on, several of us gathered inside a scout named Kevin's cell and played cards. It was surreal sitting on a metal bunk inside a real prison cell, playing a casual game in the middle of the night. Around 3 in the morning, Ash asked if I would walk with him to the bathroom. I agreed, mostly because neither of us really wanted to walk around alone at that hour. I finished using the restroom before he did, so I stepped outside the bathroom area to wait for him. After pacing back and forth for a few minutes, I realized he was taking longer than expected. I went back inside to check on him. I could hear the sink running and the sound of the paper towel dispenser. I called out, asking if he was almost done. The second I spoke, the sink abruptly shut off. A stall door slammed closed. "Ash?" I called again, There was no answer. Then from the stall that had just slammed shut, I heard the most disturbing cackle I have ever heard. It did not sound like a normal laugh. It sounded twisted and wrong. My heart felt like it stopped. I immediately turned to run toward the exit. I yelled for Ash, saying this was not funny. From outside the bathroom door, I heard his voice reply, asking what I was talking about. He opened the door from the hallway. I did not stay inside long enough to explain. I rushed out and told him what had just happened. His expression changed instantly. His eyes widened and his face went pale. Then he said something that made everything worse. He asked me, "If you were in here the whole time, then what was that breathing I heard outside the bathroom?" We both stood there in silence for a second, as the realization hit us. Something was not right. Without saying another word, we ran out of there as fast as we could and headed back to the cell block where everyone else was asleep. We decided not to wake anyone. It sounded ridiculous even to us, and we just wanted the night to end. About an hour after I finally fell asleep, I felt something tap against my back. I woke up instantly and looked around the dark cell. Everyone appeared to be asleep. The room was quiet. Still, I had the overwhelming feeling that I was not alone. In the dim light, I noticed a dark shape in the corner of the cell. It was not clear enough to make out details, but it was there. I screamed at the top of my lungs. My scoutmaster rushed over and asked what was wrong. I struggled to find words to explain what I had felt and seen. I could barely make sense of it myself. Alcatraz has a long and grim history filled with suffering and violence. Whether what Ash and I experienced was our imagination running wild or something truly unexplained, I cannot say for sure. But that night on the island felt far from normal. To this day, I cannot shake the feeling that we encountered something that should not have been there.